Hello, we are coming to you from the beautiful land that some people call the United States and I call Turtle Island. This is my audience today. All right, shall we begin?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, audience, you may have your seat. You can go sit down. Okay. Skana wat goaga. This is an ancient greeting that means, is the great peace with you? My answer today would be, skana wat goa, meaning, yes, the great peace is with me. And that is an ancient greeting from the Haudenosaunee, who have many tribes, and one that is my ancestors, the Ganyegahaga, they would say this, and it is what I would ask you today. Skana wat goaga, is the great peace with you? What I wonder is about how many times in the last 365 days have you felt content, happy, and safe? About a year ago, I personally felt unsatisfied with my own sense of agency, fraught with anxiety and depression, and this was the reality of my daily life. I felt very out of control and very much not with the great peace. I believe that considering indigenous communication values and practices would benefit all the people of Turtle Island, both those indigenous and those who have come from overseas to live on this beautiful land. If you feel currently at peace, content, and happy, then I wish to share ways that you can inspire these things in the people around you. And if you do not feel at peace, content, and happy, I wish to share with you paths. You need to go sit down, okay? Thank you. I wish to share with you paths to embody these things in daily life. Over this year, I have begun a transformation, and I did this by studying indigenous practices of peaceful communication. I've used books, websites, and my own history of my ancestors and other ancestors that lived on this land. I seek to share how many of us in what we may now call America on the average day feel that we need to resort to violence when we are afraid and when we do not agree. I wish to share how in learning nonviolent communication, then we can be patient in finding unanimity and becoming more comfortable with disagreeing. I also share through sowing and harvesting the seeds of self-confidence, of peace and health, we can nurture stability of our entire culture and our personal selves. I see today that Americans live on average in fear on the daily life. When we do not agree, we resort to violence. And one interesting thing that I've found is that a large part of this actually stems from our habitudes, and one of those is the influence of television in our lives. On average, the average American over the age of 18 watches about 4 hours of television every day. And on average, according to Tough Guys 2, a TV that one of my professors showed me, a movie, then the more you watch television, the more sexist you are likely to be, specifically not wanting to vote for a woman president, the more at fear you're going to be of being attacked on walks at night and things like that, and have that specifically go to racial fear and thus want for segregation. And the more likely you are, let me see. Looks like I left that part out. That's okay. Men, though, specifically over men and women, are more likely to act violently. They are, on average, those who not only commit the most violent crimes, but are actually usually the victims of violent crimes more often than women. And men who are more likely to act in these violent crimes are the majority of the US government. Only 51% of the population is women, so actually over 0.5%, but only 30% of all those women comprise any amount of government official within statewide elections. And I think the struggle between cultures in America and outside of America mirror each other. And this is covered in study of indigenous peoples. And when we look at how we interact with each other and our own fear, and for example, television's effect on us, when we are watching more shows that make us afraid, as we see more violence, as we see women being irrational and thinking this is how women are in real life, and all these things, and we begin to act on these things in a real way because they become the normal for us, that continues outside and continues to be how we see people that come from other countries. And we bring this into the international level and scale, not only the internal scale. Learning nonviolent communication, it is true that we become more patient finding unanimity. We become more relaxed when we disagree with each other. And we can become comfortable then disagreeing. The truth is, with how vibrant and beautiful everything is, everyone is going to have different opinions. But just because we have different opinions does not mean we need to resort to violence. The world's oldest surviving democracy is the one that my indigenous ancestors are from, the Haudenosaunee, and they have been around for possibly 2,000 years. They implement nonviolent communication. So one of the things they use as nonviolent communication, I will show to you. I've created a poster that shows some of this, and it may be a little hard to see from one screen to another, but each of the boxes on here has a speech that has been shortened that is a thank you to one of the things in life. So one of these is thanks to the birds, one is thanks to the thunder, one is thanks to the grass, to the sun, the moon, and the stars, the teachers, and it goes on and on and on. And this thank you can go for up to an hour, but maybe as short as 2 minutes to 10. And a habitude of the Haudenosaunee is that before any important negotiation or study, they will say this out loud, and it begins something like, "We now gather our minds together to say thank you to the Mother Earth." And they would give their thank you to the Mother Earth, and in the end of giving that thanks, they would repeat, "And now our minds are one." And so coming together as one, finding all the things that we can be grateful for together before beginning any diplomatic relationship is an immense tool of peace that creates togetherness and not separateness. A modern equivalent of this is the work by Marshall Rosenberg. He has a book that I have read part of, and that when I worked as a special ed teacher was the thesis done by the special ed teacher who was above me. And his work is all about nonviolent communication, and that's actually the title of one of his books, Nonviolent Communication. So if you would prefer something from the modern science field, essentially what Marshall Rosenberg talks about is the same thing in many ways as those words that I shared. Some people call them the words before all else, or the Thanksgiving address. I know them as the Ohandagari Wadakwa, and that is the thanks that we give to all things before we begin communicating with each other. Both of these styles and solutions are totally accessible. I believe Marshall Rosenberg probably has audio versions of his books as well as physical ones. You could go to a library. And also you could just learn the concept of that and walk with the concept. The Ohandagari Wadakwa has been translated into over 48 different languages, and so is accessible to almost anyone from many of the major cities and places around the world. And it is totally free, right? And it's shared for everybody on the earth, because even though this is an indigenous practice, it's been released by the indigenous people for everyone because they desire everyone to know that peace is within all of our grasps and doesn't belong to anybody. They honestly believe that the Ohandagari Wadakwa is one of the most valuable treasures that the earth has, the power for peace. In sowing and harvesting the seeds of self-confidence, health, and peace, we nurture stability of culture and self. And I really think this is apparent in the Haudenosaunee's democracy that has lasted longer than any other living democracy. When we value non-violent communication, we're more likely to include women in leadership roles. Now, I found when I was looking around in my research that almost all of the countries that do not have an army have a far larger percentage of women in their government than a lot of the countries that have a large army. When we learn to value diversity, we're less likely to resort to violence. And I think we can see that in those governments that have more men and women and equality of the sexes within their government, they're less likely to have an army and less likely to go to war. Both culture and individual become more stable in peace. Again, the Haudenosaunee, indigenous people who call this land Turtle Island, some of my ancestors, may be the world's oldest living democracy on the planet. They are possibly 2,000 years old just in that democracy, which is 5 nations, now 6, that have come together to work as a unit. In comparison, Greece's Athenian democracy lasted only about 140 years, and we learn about that in our textbooks a lot, about ancient Greece and ancient Rome, but we don't learn about the democracy that's still alive, that is on this continent, still going. And one similarity I found interesting from that Athenian short-lived democracy to the Haudenosaunee democracy, and as well mirrored in the US government, is that in the Athenian democracy, women could not vote. It was not a true democracy. Men had the vote. And in the US originally, when the government was created, only men had the vote, and the US government is struggling. But Haudenosaunee democracy, women and men both share power equally. And when the Haudenosaunee were actually asked for their opinion when the US government was being formulated, one of the things they said was, you have to share the power with the women, and that was ignored. So I think we could have avoided a lot of the wars we've gone to by including women in the ability to vote and be equally in government. I've aimed to share why considering Indigenous communication values and practices would benefit all of the people of Turtle Island, Indigenous and no. I hope I've offered a clear vision of how Americans live in fear and resort to violence if they do not agree. How through learning nonviolent communication, we can come to be patient with finding unanimity and to become comfortable with disagreeing with each other. And how in sowing and harvesting the seeds of peace in our life, confidence and health, we can nurture stability of ourself and of the entire community. When you touch another person with your words, and you consider your power to create peace, contentedness, and happiness, these are the foundation of a stable life, of community, and of our entire nation, ultimately. The Haudenosaunee, through their ups and downs, have survived as the world's oldest living democracy, and I believe, as one of their descendants, that this is because of their capacity to choose peaceful communication, and by looking ahead 7 generations. What will you do next as you walk on the back of this Turtle Island? Upon this fertile carapace, what seeds will you sow with your words and your actions? Through each word you speak, peace is in your grasp. And the last thing I would like to share with you is this book. This is Braiding, Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She is an Indigenous elder, a neighbor of the Haudenosaunee. She's from the Anishinaabe, and she shares the Ohondagari Wadakwa, those words that I shared with you. She shares a version of them in this book, and it is for anyone, and a fantastic book about peaceful communication. In it, she talks about many things, including this. There is a little piece on my necklace called, some people call it wampum. This is from the Quahog shell. And this is part of that original story where my greeting at the beginning of this came from. The is the great peace with you comes from the story of the peacemaker. He was somebody who put forth the idea of peaceful communication, and he was able to unite those 5 nations, now 6, into the Haudenosaunee. Originally, they were warring, cannibalistic nations, but with the power of peaceful communication, they came together as one.